Before we start, there's a whole library of exclusive content you're missing out on. Patreon only, nowhere else. Link in the description. Okay, on to the video. The road into Ryusan ended at a crooked signpost where three merchants spat on the ground the moment Kang Iseon asked about the abandoned estate on the eastern hill. The eldest among them counted on calloused fingers the 6 previous owners and the manner of their ending. One hanged from the rafters by morning of the 3rd day. One ran naked into the forest and was found gnawing on bark. 2 vanished without leaving so much as a sandal behind. The last pair lost their minds inside a single fortnight and were dragged out by their own families. The price had dropped from 12,000 to 800, and still no buyer came forward to sign the deed at the magistrate's office. Kang Iseon weighed the cloth pouch at the waist and counted exactly 800 copper coins inside it. The magistrate, a thin man named Pao Renshu, smirked while pushing the ink across the desk and warned that no refund would be issued once the seal was pressed. Iseon pressed the seal anyway and walked up the hill before sunset, carrying a single bedroll and a chipped iron knife bought for 40 coppers from a market stall. The manor squatted at the end of an overgrown path lined with dead plum trees that should have flowered months ago. Heavy doors of black wood gave way with a low groan when shoved hard with the shoulder. Dust rose in soft clouds and caught the last red light from the broken window above the entrance hall. Kang Iseon walked through 6 empty rooms before finding the staircase that wound down into a stone cellar smelling of damp iron. An altar of carved obsidian stood at the cellar's center, ringed by cymbals that pulsed faintly when a boot scuffed too close to them. Returning to the upper floor, Iseon crossed into the inner garden through a sliding door and stopped because the garden was not empty after all. 6 statues of pale stone stood among the weeds in a wide circle, each one shaped like a young woman frozen in a different gesture. The first held a raised hand, as if commanding an army to halt at the edge of a cliff. The second was caught mid-step in what looked like a slow dance, with eyes closed and chin lifted. The third bowed with palms pressed together in the posture of prayer at a temple gate. The fourth leaned on a slender sword with a mocking tilt to the mouth. The fifth crouched low with both hands open as if drawing a blade across the throat of a kneeling enemy. The sixth had no face at all, only smooth stone where the features should have been carved. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind Kang Iseon, just as the inspection of the 6th statue began. A girl no older than 17 stood at the garden gate with a basket of dried fish on the hip and dark braids pulled tight against the scalp. Her name was Hu Meilan, and she introduced herself as the only village woman willing to deliver goods to this hill for double pay. Meilan said that the previous owner had ordered fish every week and then stopped ordering one morning without warning. Kang Iseon paid her 30 coppers for the basket and asked whether anyone in Ryusan knew what the statues represented. Hu Meilan shook the head twice and answered that the old grandmothers warned children to never look the statues in the face under any circumstance. Curiosity overruled caution, and Kang Iseon walked back to the first statue while Meilan watched from the safer distance of the garden gate. Bare fingertips brushed the stone shoulder of the aristocrat with the raised hand, and the entire manor seemed to inhale at once. Faded red seals across every wall of the house flared to life with a deep crimson glow that bled through the paper screens. Stone cracked along the spine of the first statue, and a thin line of warmth spread outward across the carved surface. Hu Meilan dropped the second basket of dried fish and bolted down the path without looking back even once. The crack widened into a fissure, and living skin showed through it, pale as river ice and warm to the touch when tested with a careful finger. A breath escaped the statue's parted lips, and the raised hand lowered slowly to settle on Kang Iseon's wrist, with a grip that did not allow retreat. Pale eyes opened and fixed on the face leaning above them, with an attention that felt like the weight of a sword laid across the throat. The aristocrat spoke a single sentence in an accent that belonged to no province on any current map. She asked whether the new owner had any idea what had just been purchased for 800 copper coins. Kang Iseon answered honestly that none of it had been explained at the magistrate's office. The 5 remaining statues began to crack along their spines in sequence, one after another, each release sending a low hum through the soles of the boots. The dancer arched the back and stepped out of the stone with eyes still closed as if continuing a performance interrupted 6 centuries earlier. The priestess opened her eyes last, and the reflected lights inside them did not match the dying sun above the garden. The sword leaner pulled the weapon free of the stone base and tested the edge against a fallen leaf with visible satisfaction. The crouching figure rose slowly, with both hands still curved as if holding an invisible throat. The faceless one stayed still for the longest moment before features began to draw themselves across the smooth surface in slow strokes of shadow. The aristocrat introduced herself as Yan Suoling, heir of a house whose name had been struck from every official ledger in the year of the Black Comet. The dancer offered the name Mo Qingzhi with a smile that was not entirely friendly. The priestess gave only the syllable rin and refused to add more. The swordswoman declared herself Bai Hualing and laughed at the iron knife visible at Kang Iseon's belt. The crouching one said the name Shun Yue in a low voice that promised explanations would have to be earned. The faceless one said nothing at all and only inclined the half-formed head in a gesture that might have been a bow or might have been a marking. Yen Suoling tightened the grip on Kang Iseon's wrist and announced that the ritual had bound all 6 of them to the legal owner of the manor by old law that could not be undone by mortal courts. Kang Iseon answered that the deed had cost exactly 800 copper coins, and the magistrate had refused to mention any of this in advance. Bai Hualing laughed and said that a bargain like that would have been worth murder in her century. Bai Hualing kicked open the door of Kang Iseon's bedroom at dawn and announced that the manor had 4 intruders climbing the eastern wall already. The iron knife came off the bedside table in one motion, and Kang Iseon followed the swordswoman down the corridor without bothering to lace the boots fully. Bai Hualing moved with the confidence of someone who had walked these halls long before the wood floors warped and the paper screens yellowed. 4 men in the gray cloth of cheap mercenaries were halfway over the eastern wall with grappling hooks of bent iron and short curved blades. Yen Suoling waited in the courtyard already, arms folded under the wide sleeves of a robe that had been pulled from a chest of preserved clothing in the cellar. The aristocrat asked in a flat voice whether Kang Iseon wanted the intruders alive for questioning or dead as a message to whoever had hired them. Kang Iseon answered that alive would teach more than dead, and Yan Suoling nodded once at Bai Hualing as if dispatching a hunting dog. The swordswoman crossed the courtyard in 3 strides and disarmed the first mercenary by breaking the wrist with a single twist of her bare hand. The second man swung at her face and lost the blade along with 2 fingers to a counter that Kang Iseon barely tracked with the eye. Within a count of 12, all 4 intruders lay face down in the gravel, with their own ropes binding the wrists behind the back. Bai Hualing planted a sandaled foot on the spine of the largest one and asked who had paid the contract and for how much. The mercenary spat gravel and named a sum of 3 silver per head, paid by a steward of the magistrate's office in Ryusan. Kang Iseon crouched and pulled a folded paper from the man's inner pocket, finding a crude map of the manor with the master bedroom marked by a red circle. Yan Suling read the map over Kang Iseon's shoulder and observed that Pao Renshu had clearly not expected the new owner to survive even the first night. Mo Qingzi appeared at the courtyard edge with bare feet on the cold stones and a smile that suggested the morning was finally becoming interesting. The dancer asked Kang Iseon whether killing a magistrate was still considered a serious crime in this century or merely an administrative inconvenience. Breakfast was eaten in the dusty main hall on a table wiped clean by Rin, the priestess who had not yet spoken a second sentence since waking. Shen Yue refused to sit at the table and stood by the cracked window, watching the road for further visitors with the patience of a stalking cat. The sixth woman, whose features had settled overnight into a face neither young nor old, finally gave a name in a voice that did not seem to come from any particular direction. The name was Wu Yingsha, and the request that followed was for Kang Iseon to never ask what she had been before the sealing. Kang Iseon agreed without negotiation, and Wu Yingsha inclined the head the way a creditor accepts partial repayment. Hu Meilan arrived at the gate with the morning fish basket and froze on the path when 6 women came out into the courtyard behind Kang Iseon. Mo Qingzhi waved at the village girl with a friendly hand, and Hu Meilan dropped the basket for the second time in 2 days. Kang Iseon walked down to the gate, picked up the spilled fish, and paid Meilan triple to deliver a list of supplies from the market within the hour. Hu Meilan accepted the heavy pouch of copper with trembling fingers and asked whether the manor now employed unmarried daughters from the village as servants. Kang Iseon answered that the manor employed no one yet, but that the position was open if Meilan wanted to discuss terms over the evening meal. A second deputation arrived 2 hours later in the form of 3 of the village elders, an interpreter for the dialect of the back hills, and the magistrate Pao Renshu himself. Pao Renshu wore a fresh silk robe with the family crest of the Wei merchant house embroidered in silver thread along the collar. Yan Suoling identified the crest with a sideways glance at Kang Iseon and noted that the Wei family had been minor grain factors 600 years ago. The magistrate apologized smoothly for the unfortunate misunderstanding of the previous night and offered a refund of the 800 copper coins plus a small inconvenience fee. Kang Iseon refused the offer politely and asked instead why the 4 hired mercenaries had carried a map drawn in the magistrate's own clerical hand. Pao Renshu paled under the powder on the cheekbones and tried to suggest that any clerk in the office could have produced such a document. Bai Hualing stepped into view from behind a column, with one of the mercenaries still bound at the wrists and a fresh bruise across the side of the face. The bound man identified Pao Renshu by name and described the silver counted into his palm in the back room of the magistrate's office 2 evenings earlier. Pao Renshu attempted to retreat and discovered that Shen Ye stood directly behind him with a blade taken from the disarmed mercenaries pressed lightly against the lower spine. Negotiations concluded within 10 minutes, with terms favorable to the new owner of the manor. Pao Renshu signed over the unpaid back taxes on the manor's 6 hectares of attached forest, waived the seal fee for any future construction permits, and provided in writing the name of the Wei family member who had funded the assassination contract. The name written on the paper was Wei Chongmin, 3rd son of the current Wei patriarch, 24 years old, recently returned from study in the capital. Yan Suoling read the name twice and observed that ambitious 3rd sons with capital connections rarely worked alone in matters of property acquisition. Kang Iseon released Pao Renshu with the surviving mercenaries and a clear warning that the next visit from any party would not end with paperwork. Mo Qingzhi watched the procession leave the gate and remarked to Rin that the new century seemed to use much smaller knives than the old one. Rin answered with a single word that Kang Iseon did not catch, but that made Mo Qingzhi laugh quietly for the first time since waking. Hu Meilan returned at the 3rd hour with 2 pack mules loaded with rice and oil and salt, and bolts of plain cloth purchased at the market. Kang Iseon invited the village girl into the manor for tea, and Meilan accepted with a glance at Yan Suoling that was equal parts fear and curiosity. Over the tea, the position of household manager was offered at 1 silver per month, plus room and board within the manor walls. Hu Meilong signed the simple contract Kang Iseon drafted on a sheet of clean paper using a borrowed brush and the manor's old inkstone. Yen Suoling watched the signing with a private expression, and afterward told Kang Iseon that the village girl would prove useful, for reasons that would only become clear within a week. A black lacquered carriage stopped at the manor gate before noon, and a courier in Wei livery delivered a sealed letter and a chest of 100 silver. Kang Iseon broke the wax seal in the courtyard, with Yen Suoling reading the characters over the shoulder as the paper unfolded. The letter was written in the formal merchant script of the capital and signed by Wei Changmin in a confident hand that pressed hard into the rice paper. The offer was a clean purchase of the manor and its forest for 3,000 silver, payable on signature, with the deed transferred at the magistrate's office within 3 days. Yan Suoling translated the polite phrasing into plain meaning and concluded that the figure was 3 times the actual land value, and therefore a screen for something else entirely. Bai Hualing inspected the chest of 100 silver and confirmed that the metal was pure and the weights matched the stamped marks. Kang Iseon wrote a refusal on the back of the original letter, sealed it with a thumbprint pressed in red ink from the cellar altar, and handed it to the courier with the chest of silver still untouched. The courier accepted the response without expression, and the carriage rolled away down the hill within 2 minutes of arrival. Mo Qingzi watched the dust settle and asked Yan Suoling whether the Wei family kept assassins on permanent retainer or only contracted them by the season. Yan Suoling answered that merchant houses of any era kept whatever was profitable on retainer, and that a refusal of 3,000 silver guaranteed a second visit before sundown. The second visit arrived in the form of 3 robed scholars, climbing the hill on foot 2 hours after the carriage had departed. Hu Meilong announced the arrivals from the gatehouse and described them as men with the soft hands of clerks rather than fighters. Kang Iseon received them in the main hall, with Yen Suoling standing 1 pace behind and slightly to the right in the posture of a senior advisor. The eldest scholar introduced himself as Tao Wen-shu, a property assessor from the regional governor's office, accompanied by 2 junior surveyors. Tao Wen-shu claimed that the manor's deed had been improperly registered due to a clerical error, and presented a fresh document declaring the original sale invalid. Yen Suoling examined the seal on the new document for the span of 3 breaths, and noted aloud that the regional governor's office used a different shade of cinnabar in its wax. Tao Wen-shu denied the accusation and demanded immediate vacation of the premises pending review. Kang Iseon asked the assessor to wait in the courtyard while the matter was verified through proper channels. The 3 scholars stepped outside under the watchful position of Bai Hualing, leaning against a column with 1 hand resting on the hilt of a borrowed sword. Wu Yingxia entered the hall through the inner door without being summoned and walked directly to the document on the table. A pale fingertip traced the seal once and then twice, and Wu Yingxia stated in the toneless voice that the wax had been melted and reapplied at least 4 days after the original stamping. Yen Suoling raised an eyebrow at the unsolicited assistance and asked how such an analysis had been possible from a single touch. Wu Yingxia answered only that certain things had been part of an old occupation, and offered no further detail. Kang Iseon filed the information away without pressing, and stepped back into the courtyard to address Tao Wen-shu directly. The forged document was held up in plain view, and the discrepancy of the wax was pointed out by name in the presence of all 3 scholars. Tao Wen-shu's color drained, and one of the junior surveyors actually took a step backward toward the gate. Kang Iseon offered the assessor a single chance to name the party who had commissioned the forgery in exchange for free passage off the hill. Tao Wen-shu named Wei Changmin within the count of 3, and added the further detail that the forgery had been produced in a workshop above a tea house called the Jade Crane in the merchant district of Ryusan. Shen Yue volunteered to visit the Jade Crane that evening and was given approval after a short discussion with Yan Suoling about the political consequences of leaving bodies in public establishments. Kang Iseon drew a clear line at no killings on the first reconnaissance, and Shen Yue accepted the restriction with a small dip of the chin that conveyed disappointment without protest. Hu Meilan was sent into the village separately to gather rumor about the comings and goings at the Jade Crane over the past week. The household manager left at the 4th hour with a small purse of copper for buying drinks at the lower markets where serving girls and laundrywomen traded gossip. Mo Qingzi cornered Kang Iseon in the corridor between the kitchen and the eastern wing and announced that the dancer had been thinking about the binding all morning. The exact words were that the old ritual had names and clauses and exceptions written into it, and that Kang Iseon ought to learn them before any further surprises arrived. The conversation moved to the library on the 2nd floor, where shelves still held perhaps 400 volumes under thick gray dust. Mo Qingzi pulled 3 books from a low shelf within the first minute and stacked them on the reading table with the practiced ease of someone who had used this room before. The dancer explained that the binding tied the 6 women to the legal owner, but did not tie the owner equally to the 6. Kang Iseon asked the practical consequence, and Mo Qingji answered that any of the 6 could choose to break the bond, at the cost of becoming mortal and aging at a normal human rate from that moment forward. Hu Meilan returned from the village at sundown with a face full of news and a basket of fresh dumplings purchased as cover for the gossip expedition. The household manager reported that Wei Changmin had arrived in Ryusan 2 weeks earlier, accompanied by a personal cultivator of the 4th rank named Mu Daosheng. Yan Suoling reacted to the name with a sharpness that Kang Iseon had not seen in the aristocrat before. The Mu family had been imperial executioners 6 centuries ago, and a surviving branch in the current era meant institutional memory of techniques that no public school still taught. Bai Hualing inspected a borrowed sword in the courtyard while the conversation continued in the hall, and tested the balance of the blade with 3 slow practice cuts. Kang Iseon asked Yan Suling for an honest assessment of the manor's defenses against a 4th rank cultivator, and the answer came back as inadequate without significant preparation. The preparation began that night, with Yan Suling drawing fresh seals along the inner walls, using a brush of badger hair and ink that Mo Qingzi mixed from cellar ingredients. Rin, the silent priestess, joined the work without being asked, and traced a circle of protection across the threshold of every doorway facing the eastern slope. Wu Yingxia stood at the courtyard center for 2 hours and seemed to listen to something that none of the others could hear before pronouncing that the first attack would come on the 3rd night from the direction of the dead plum trees. Wu Yingxia had named the hour correctly, and Kang Iseon stood at the gate with Bai Hualing on the left and Shen Yue on the right when the executioner came into view. Yan Suoling watched from the upper balcony, with Mo Qingzhi and Rin already kneeling at the prepared seal points along the courtyard perimeter. Hu Meilan had been ordered into the cellar at sundown, with strict instructions to bolt the inner door from the inside and open it only to the spoken word of Kang Iseon. Mu Daosheng stopped at the threshold of the gate and bowed at exactly the depth that one professional offered to another professional before a contract execution. The executioner introduced himself by family name and rank and stated that the contract was for the legal owner of the manor only, with no payment offered for additional casualties. Kang Iseon thanked Mu Daosheng for the courtesy and replied that no surrender would be offered and no terms would be negotiated. Bai Hualing stepped forward with the borrowed sword raised in a low guard and asked permission to take the first exchange against the visitor. Mu Daosheng accepted the challenge with another small bow, and the iron staff came off the shoulders in a single fluid motion. The first exchange lasted 12 heartbeats and ended with Bai Hualing thrown 3 paces backward with a numb arm and a cracked guard. The swordswoman landed on the feet and laughed once before announcing to Kang Iseon that the visitor was indeed of the 4th rank as reported. Shen Yue moved next without waiting for permission, and the second exchange went for 16 heartbeats before the warrior was kicked into the gravel with a bleeding lip. Mu Daosheng did not pursue either opponent on the ground and waited politely for the next challenger or for Kang Iseon to step forward in person. Yan Suoling called down from the balcony a single word in the old tongue, and the prepared seals along the perimeter activated with a deep crimson pulse. The executioner felt the change in the air immediately and shifted the stance to account for the new pressure pressing against the skin. Rin began a low chant from the kneeling position at the western seal point, and the air around Mu Daosheng grew visibly heavier with each repetition. Mo Qingzi rose from the kneeling position at the eastern seal and walked into the courtyard with both hands moving in slow patterns through the air. The dancer's bare feet traced a spiral across the gravel, and each completed turn pulled the heaviness around the executioner tighter against the skin. Mu Daosheng recognized the technique by name and called it the binding spiral of the Mo school, lost to public knowledge for 6 centuries. Mo Qingju smiled without breaking the pattern and confirmed that the school had indeed produced no new students for a very long time. The iron staff swept through the air toward the dancer, and Bai Hualing intercepted the strike with the borrowed sword at the cost of a chipped edge and a deeper numbness in the arm. Shen Yue rose from the gravel and circled to the executioner's back with a thin blade taken from a fallen mercenary 2 days earlier. Kang Iseon watched the developing position from the gate and noted that 3 women operating in coordination were containing a 4th-rank cultivator that would have crushed any one of them alone. The binding spiral closed completely, and Mu Daosheng dropped to one knee, with the iron staff planted in the gravel as a brace against falling further. Yan Suoling descended from the balcony at a calm pace and crossed the courtyard to stand directly in front of the kneeling executioner. The aristocrat asked Mu Daosheng a question in a language that Kang Iseon did not recognize, and the executioner answered in the same language with visible difficulty. The exchange continued for perhaps 30 seconds, and ended with Yan Suoling turning to Kang Iseon with a small frown across the pale forehead. The translation was that Wei Changmin had paid 1,000 silver in advance and promised 2,000 more on confirmed death, and that the Mu family branch was operating from a townhouse in the central district of Ryusan. Kang Iseon asked whether the executioner could be released alive without immediate reprisal, and Yan Suoling answered that professional courtesy would hold for 1 cycle of refusal before becoming personal. The decision was made within the count of 5, and Mu Daosheng was permitted to rise once the binding spiral was loosened by Mo Qingji. The executioner bowed once more at the gate threshold and stated that the contract would be returned to Wei Changmin as uncompleted by the morning. Mu Daosheng walked down the hill at the same calm pace as the arrival and disappeared into the darkness within 2 minutes. Hu Meilan emerged from the cellar at the spoken signal and brought a tray of hot tea up to the main hall where the 6 women had gathered around the long table. Bai Hualing rolled the sore shoulder and announced that the borrowed sword had finally proven inadequate and that a proper weapon would need to be acquired before the next confrontation. Yan Suoling produced a list written during the previous afternoon and read out 7 items needed for a permanent reinforcement of the manor's defenses. The list included 3 specific minerals from the Western Mountains, 2 volumes of warding theory believed to exist in the regional library, and a master smith capable of working the cellar's obsidian altar into usable weapon blanks. Kang Iseon reviewed the manor's accounts with Hu Meilan and confirmed that the household held 112 silver between the original 800 copper and the previous afternoon's tax refund from Pao Renshu. The figure was insufficient for the list by a factor of at least 8, and a source of income would need to be established within the week. Mo Qingzhi suggested that the manor's hidden library on the second floor likely contained at least one volume valuable to a serious collector in the capital. Wu Yingxia, who had not entered the courtyard at any point during the confrontation, spoke from the corner of the hall and named a specific book on the third shelf of the western alcove. The named volume was a treatise on extinct calligraphy schools that Mo Qingzhi confirmed would sell for at least 200 gold in the capital auction houses. Kang Iseon thanked Wu Yingxia and asked how the Nameless One had known the exact location of a book never personally inspected by the new owner. Wu Yingxia answered that the manor had been familiar territory long before the sealing, and offered no further explanation beyond the small inclination of the head that ended every such conversation. The calligraphy treatise was wrapped in oiled silk before sunrise, and Hu Meilan saddled the manor's only mule for the trip into town. Kang Iseon departed for Yusan at the second hour after dawn, with Yan Suoling at the side in a plain traveling robe and a wide straw hat pulled low. The aristocrat had insisted on the escort, with the argument that no auction house in any century could be trusted by a first-time seller. Bai Hualing remained at the manor as primary guard, with Shen Ye patrolling the outer perimeter and Rin maintaining the seals along the inner walls. Mo Qingzhi was given the task of cataloging the rest of the library to identify further saleable volumes. Wu Yingxia had retreated to the cellar at first light without explanation, and Hu Meilan was instructed to deliver only water and bread to that door. The road into Ryusan was busier than on the original arrival, and Kang Iseon noted 3 checkpoints staffed by guards in unfamiliar gray uniforms. Yan Suoling identified the uniform as belonging to a private security company called Iron Wing, recently contracted by the merchant houses of the Central District. The third checkpoint demanded a transit fee of 20 copper per traveler, and Kang Iseon paid without argument to avoid drawing attention. The auction house in Ryusan was a 3-story building of black tile and red lacquered beams in the merchant quarter near the Jade Crane Tea House. The senior appraiser was an elderly woman named Bo Xianzi, who received the wrapped treatise with the careful hands of long professional habit. Bo Xianzi unwrapped the volume in a private back room and studied the first 3 pages under a thick lens for the span of perhaps 10 minutes. The verdict came in a quiet voice and named a reserve price of 180 gold, with an estimated final sale between 240 and 300. Yan Suoling negotiated a commission of 7% against the standard 10, and Bo Xianzi accepted after a single counteroffer. The auction was scheduled for the evening of the same day, and the treatise was registered under the seller name of a shell merchant identity that Yan Suoling had prepared during the previous evening. Kang Iseon signed the registration with a brush borrowed from the appraiser's desk and pressed a fresh thumbprint to seal the agreement. Bo Zhanzi offered tea and a small bowl of pickled plums, and asked in a careful tone where the volume had been kept for the past century. The answer prepared by Yan Suoling was a family inheritance recently rediscovered during the cleaning of an old country property. Bo Zhanzi accepted the explanation without visible doubt, and added that several collectors from the capital were already in town for the evening auction. The appraiser named 3 of them, and Yan Suoling marked one name with a small flicker of recognition. The marked name was Lady Qin Yuhua, sole heir of a noble line in the capital, 26 years old, known for an obsessive collection of pre-dynastic calligraphy. Kang Iseon filed the information away and asked Bo Zhanzi whether seller anonymity could be guaranteed, even from the eventual buyer. The appraiser confirmed that the auction house held seller identity in absolute confidence by long-established tradition and corporate oath. The meeting concluded within the hour, and Kang Iseon left with Yan So-ling through the back entrance to avoid being marked by anyone watching the public door. The Jade Crane Tea House stood 2 streets away, and Yan So-ling suggested a visit on foot for the purpose of independent verification of Tao Wen-shu's earlier statement. The tea house was busy with the late morning crowd, and the upper floor was clearly marked as private hire space, available by reservation only. Kang Iseon ordered a pot of mid-grade green tea and 2 small plates of sweet rice cakes for cover. Yan So-ling watched the staircase to the upper floor for the span of perhaps 20 minutes, and noted the comings and goings of 3 particular men in clerical robes. The third of the 3 was identified by Yan So-ling as a known forger from the previous century, which made no logical sense until the aristocrat clarified that the man was likely a descendant trading on family technique. Kang Iseon paid the bill and left a generous tip, with instructions to the serving girl to remember the face. The serving girl pocketed the extra copper without comment, and Kang Iseon departed with Yan So-ling at a casual walking pace. A man in plain gray robes followed at a distance of 20 paces, and Yan So-ling identified the tail within 30 seconds of leaving the tea house. The tail was lost through a deliberate detour through the cloth merchant's alley, and Kang Iseon returned to the auction house in time for the evening event with 30 minutes to spare. The bidding for the treatise began at 180 gold and rose in steady increments through 6 interested parties. The final 2 bidders were Lady Qin Yuhua, attending in person from a private box on the upper balcony, and an anonymous proxy bidding by raised paddle for an unknown patron. The price climbed past 350 gold and finally closed at 420 gold to Lady Qin Yuhua after the anonymous proxy withdrew at 400. Bo Shanzi processed the transaction within the hour, and Kang Iseon departed with 390 gold after the commission. Yan So-ling counted the gold into a hidden inner pocket of the traveling robe and observed that the result had exceeded the high estimate by a comfortable margin. A young woman in a green silk overcoat intercepted Kang Iseon at the side entrance of the auction house with a polite bow and a folded card pressed into the hand. The card identified the bearer as a personal attendant of Lady Qin Yuhua and requested a meeting at the noble's residence on the following afternoon. Yan So-ling read the card and noted that refusing such an invitation from a capital noble would be remembered for a long time. Kang Iseon agreed to the meeting, and the green silk attendant departed with another bow and instructions for the address. The ride back to the manor was made in the dark, with Yan So-ling riding behind on the mule and Kang Iseon leading on foot to spare the animal. A second tail was detected at the second checkpoint, and this one wore the gray of Iron Wing, rather than the plain gray of the morning follower. Yan So-ling concluded that 2 separate parties were now interested in the new owner of the Eastern Hill Manor. The manor gate was reached at the 11th hour of the night, and Bai Hualing met the returning party at the gate with the report that Wu Yinxia had emerged from the cellar at sundown with a stack of old papers and a request to speak with Kang Iseon alone upon return. Kang Iseon handed the gold to Hu Mei-lan for secure storage in the inner strongbox and walked directly to the small reading room where Wu Yinxia waited beside a single oil lamp. Wu Yinxia placed 7 folded papers on the reading table the moment Kang Iseon crossed the threshold of the room. The oil lamp cast a narrow circle of yellow light across the dark wood, and Kang Iseon sat down opposite the nameless one without speaking. Wu Yinxia unfolded the first paper and turned it so that the writing faced Kang Iseon directly across the table. The script was old, and the ink had faded to a dull brown, but the seal at the bottom was still clearly legible as the personal mark of an imperial inspector. Wu Yinxia stated quietly that this paper was the original sealing order for the 6 women, signed 607 years ago by a man named Inspector Lu Jianzhou. The second paper was a list of the 6 original names, and Kang Iseon read it in order with growing care. The first 5 names matched the women already in the manor: Yan Suoling, Bai Hualing, Mo Qingzhi, Rin of the Sky Temple, and Shen Yue of the Crouching Branch. The 6th name on the original list was not Wu Yingxia, but a different name written in a script even older than the others. The name was nearly worn away, but the visible characters spelled out something close to Inspector Lu Jianzhou. Kang Iseon looked up from the paper and met the pale eyes of Wu Yingxia across the table without immediately speaking. The nameless one answered the unspoken question with a single nod and a quiet confirmation that the original 6th statue had not been a sealed woman at all. Wu Yingxia explained that the inspector had been bound into the ritual at the last moment as the anchor that allowed the other 5 seals to hold. The price of the anchoring had been the inspector's own form, dissolved and reformed as the faceless guardian of the binding for as long as the manor stood. Kang Iseon asked the obvious question, and Wu Yingxia answered that the body now seated across the table had been built from memory and stone over the course of 6 centuries. The original Lu Jianzhou had been a man, and the rebuilding had not preserved that detail because the binding ritual had drawn from the patterns of the other 5 sealed forms. Kang Iseon absorbed the information for the span of perhaps 10 seconds, and then asked what Wu Yingxia preferred to be called going forward. The answer was that Wu Yingxia would serve as the working name, and that the original identity was a matter of historical record rather than present concern. The remaining 5 papers covered the technical details of the binding, and Wu Yingxia walked Kang Iseon through each of them in careful order. The 3rd paper described the energy flow between the manor and the bound forms, and confirmed Mo Qingji's earlier statement about voluntary breaking. The 4th paper listed 3 external threats that the original inspector had anticipated as eventual challengers to the binding. The first listed threat was the surviving branches of the 5 original families, who would seek either restoration or revenge depending on circumstance. The second listed threat was the imperial court itself, which had records of the binding and might at any time decide to verify the seal's continued integrity. The third listed threat was a single named individual called the Black Reader, a scholar specialist in dissolving old bindings whose lineage had been active for over 1,000 years. Kang Iseon asked whether the Black Reader was still active in the current century, and Wu Yingxia answered that the position was hereditary and never vacant. The current Black Reader would be a man or woman in middle age, operating out of the capital under a name that changed with each generation. The 5th paper described the manor's hidden assets, beyond the obvious library and the cellar altar. Wu Yingxia named a sealed vault beneath the western wing containing original cultivation manuals from each of the 5 sealed lineages. The 6th paper was a map of the manor with 3 additional concealed rooms marked in red ink. The 7th paper was a personal letter from Inspector Lu Jianzhou, addressed to whichever future owner would eventually awaken the seals. The letter was brief, and the contents apologized for the burden being inherited, and requested only that the new owner treat the 5 women with respect rather than as tools. Kang Iseon read the letter twice, and then folded it carefully and placed it inside the inner pocket of the traveling robe. Wu Yingxia watched the gesture without comment, and then asked whether the new owner had any questions before the conversation closed. Kang Iseon asked one question, which was whether Wu Yingxia could fight at the level of the other 5 if circumstances required it in the future. The answer was that the anchor form held knowledge of all 5 sealed techniques in incomplete reflection, and could fight at perhaps the level of a 3rd-rank cultivator if pushed to extremity. The conversation closed at the 2nd hour after midnight, and Kang Iseon walked down the corridor toward the bedroom with the 7 papers secured inside the robe. Yan Suoling intercepted Kang Iseon in the corridor with a polite question about the nature of the long meeting. Kang Iseon considered the question for perhaps 3 seconds, and then answered with the truth in compressed form. The aristocrat listened to the summary about Inspector Lu Jianzhou and the anchor binding without visible reaction, and then offered a single observation. The observation was that the original inspector had been remembered in the 5 sealed lineages as a fair and competent official, which spoke well of the trust now placed in the current owner. Yan Suling added that the other 4 would be told the truth at a moment of the inspector's own choosing, and not before. Kang Iseon agreed to the discretion, and Yan Suling departed for the eastern wing with a small nod of approval. The bedroom door closed behind Kang Iseon at the 3rd hour, and sleep arrived within minutes, despite the weight of the new information. The morning brought Hu Meilan with a breakfast tray, and the reminder that the meeting with Lady Qin Yuhua was scheduled for the afternoon of the same day. The traveling robe was brushed clean, and the 7 papers were transferred from its pocket to a hidden compartment in the bedroom floor that Wu Yinxia had marked on the map. A black carriage with the white crane crest of the Qin clan waited at the manor gate 2 hours before noon. The driver delivered a polite, formal invitation, reiterating the previous afternoon's request and offering transport for 2 guests directly to the noble's residence in the central district. Kang Iseon accepted the carriage for the convenience and selected Mo Qingzi as the second guest rather than Yan Suling. The choice was deliberate because the dancer carried genuine expertise in old calligraphy and could verify in person whether Lady Qin Yuhua's interest in the treatise was scholarly or political. Yan Suling agreed to the substitution with a small nod and offered 3 specific questions to be raised during the meeting if the conversation allowed. Bai Hualing was placed in command of the manor in the absence of both Kang Iseon and Yan Suling. The carriage ride into Ryusan took 90 minutes, and Mo Qingzi spent the entire trip drilling Kang Iseon on the basic etiquette of capital noble households. Forms of address, depth of bow, order of seating, acceptable topics of opening conversation, all of it was covered in compressed, practical form. Kang Iseon absorbed the material with the focus of a student who knew the test would be live. The Qin residence occupied an entire block of the central district, behind a wall of polished green stone, topped with curved tile. The gates opened on arrival, and the carriage rolled into a courtyard of white gravel, raked into perfect concentric circles. A senior steward in dark blue silk received the guests at the inner door and led them through 3 connecting halls to a private reception room overlooking a small garden. Lady Qin Yuhua waited in the reception room, seated on a low cushion behind a writing desk arranged with brushes, ink, and the freshly framed calligraphy treatise. The noble was a tall woman of perhaps 26 years, with sharp features and hair pinned with a single jade ornament shaped like a flying crane. The introductions followed the script Mo Qingzhi had drilled, and Kang Iseon delivered the bow at exactly the correct depth for a commoner addressing minor nobility. Lady Qin Yuhua returned the greeting with a half bow that acknowledged the seller's role without conceding social rank. The opening conversation covered the weather, the journey, and the quality of the regional tea, all according to form. The substance arrived after the 3rd cup, when Lady Qin Yuhua placed a slender finger on the framed treatise and asked the seller to describe the volume's provenance. The prepared answer from the previous day was repeated with no significant variation. Lady Qin Yuhua listened without interrupting, and then asked a second question, which was whether the seller's family inheritance contained any further volumes of comparable rarity. Kang Iseon answered honestly that the library was still being cataloged and that further items might emerge over the coming months. Lady Qin Yuhua accepted the answer and offered a standing arrangement of first refusal on any future sales at terms slightly above market rate. Mo Qingzi spoke for the first time and asked Lady Qin Yuhua a careful question about the noble's specific interest in the calligrapher named in the treatise. The answer revealed that the Qin family held a private archive of fragments by the same calligrapher and had been searching for a complete volume for 3 generations. Mo Qingzi nodded politely and asked one further question about a particular technique mentioned on page 17 of the treatise. Lady Qin Yuhua's reply demonstrated genuine technical knowledge, and the dancer relaxed visibly at the confirmation that the interest was indeed scholarly rather than political. The conversation turned at the 4th cup of tea, when Lady Qin Yuhua placed both hands flat on the writing desk and addressed Kang Iseon with a different tone. The noble stated that the Qin family had been observing the Eastern Hill Manor for some time, and that recent events had drawn unwelcome attention from less reputable parties. Kang Iseon asked which parties specifically, and Lady Qin Yuhua named 2 by family. The first name was Wei, which was already known. The second name was Ho, a much larger merchant clan operating across 3 provinces from a base in the capital. The Ho family had apparently inherited a centuries-old grudge against the manor's previous occupants, and considered the new ownership a matter requiring resolution. Lady Qin Yuhua offered an alliance of mutual interest, framed as patronage rather than partnership, for the sake of social form. The Qin family would provide political cover and capital introductions in exchange for first access to manor library acquisitions and a standing seat at any future negotiations involving manor lineage assets. Kang Iseon considered the offer for the span of perhaps 15 seconds, and accepted in principle pending a written agreement. The written agreement was drafted on the spot by the senior steward and reviewed by Mo Qingzi, clause by clause over the following hour. 3 modifications were requested, and 2 were accepted by Lady Qin Yuhua without argument. The third was negotiated down to a compromise that satisfied both sides. The agreement was signed and sealed in red ink, with both parties retaining a copy. Lady Qin Yuhua then made a personal request, separate from the formal agreement, which was to be invited to the manor as a private guest within the next month. The stated reason was a personal interest in seeing the property from which such treasures had emerged. Kang Iseon agreed to the visit and proposed a date 18 days forward to allow for proper preparations. Lady Qin Yuhua confirmed the date and pressed a small jade token into Kang Iseon's palm at the conclusion. The token was identified by Mo Qingji later as a personal recognition seal that would grant immediate audience at any Qin residence in any province. The meeting ended at the 5th hour, and the carriage returned the guest to the manor by the 8th hour of the evening. Yen Suoling received the report in the main hall and approved the alliance with one reservation. The reservation concerned the Ho family, whose mention had been new information to the aristocrat, despite extensive prior knowledge of the old lineages. Yen Suoling stated that the Ho family had been minor and undistinguished in her own century, and that any inherited grudge would require investigation of historical records that the manor library might or might not contain. Mo Qingji volunteered for the research task and disappeared into the library before the night was out. The conversation closed at the 10th hour, with Kang Iseon summarizing the day's gains as 1 alliance, 1 new enemy, and 1 upcoming guest. A traveling smith named Zhao Bingshen arrived at the manor gate 3 days after the meeting with Lady Qin Yuhua. The smith was a woman in her late 30s with thick arms, a leather apron over plain traveling clothes, and a pack mule loaded with portable forge equipment. Zhao Bingshen identified herself as a recommendation from Bo Xianji, the auction house appraiser, who had been quietly asked to suggest a competent master smith. The credentials offered included 2 letters of reference and a small bronze medallion identifying the bearer as a journeyman of the Western Road Guild. Yen Suoling examined the medallion under a strong light and confirmed the seal as authentic and current. Kang Iseon invited Zhao Bingshen into the courtyard and asked the smith to evaluate the seller's obsidian altar as raw material for weapon forging. The smith descended into the cellar with Bai Hualing as escort and spent the next 2 hours examining the altar from every angle with a set of small precision tools. The verdict came in plain terms when Zhao Bingshen returned to the courtyard. The altar held enough usable obsidian for either 3 swords of high quality or 7 daggers of working quality, with a small amount of waste either way. Bai Hualing immediately requested one of the swords for personal use, and Shen Yue requested a second. Kang Iseon agreed in principle and asked Zhao Bingshen for an estimate of the time and cost. The smith named a figure of 40 silver in materials beyond the altar itself, primarily for binding metals and quenching oils. The labor was offered at 60 silver per blade, plus room and board for the duration of the work, estimated at 30 days. The total cost for 3 swords came to 220 silver, well within the manor's current reserves after the auction. Kang Iseon agreed to the terms, and Hu Meilan was sent into Ryusan with a list of the binding metals and oils required. The household manager departed at noon, with 2 pack mules and a hired guard from the village for the heavier loads. Zhao Bingshen began setting up the portable forge in the rear courtyard, and Bai Hualing watched the assembly with the focused attention of a craftsman observing another craftsman's work. The smith's work began on the 4th morning after arrival, and the courtyard rang with the steady rhythm of hammer on hot metal for 10 hours of every day. Bai Hualing assisted with the simpler tasks of the forge, and learned several techniques that the swordswoman had not seen in the previous century. Shen Yue contributed by hunting in the manor's attached forest, which produced enough game to feed both the household and the smith without strain on the food budget. Mo Qingzi completed the initial research on the Ho clan during the same week and delivered a written report to Kang Iseon in the library. The report confirmed that the Ho family had indeed been minor merchants in the original century, but had risen to major status through a marriage alliance with a noble line 200 years ago. The grudge against the manor's occupants stemmed from a single incident in which Bai Hualing had reportedly killed a Ho ancestor in a duel over an insult delivered in public. Kang Iseon read the report and then walked to the rear courtyard to confirm the incident directly with the swordswoman. Bai Hualing wiped soot from the forehead and confirmed the duel in casual terms. The Ho ancestor had insulted a serving woman in a wine house, and Bai Hualing had challenged the man on the spot. The duel had been formal and witnessed, and the killing had been clean. The Ho family had not contested the outcome at the time because the dueling code of the period had been strictly enforced by the imperial court. Bai Hualing observed that grudges held for 6 centuries reflected the holder more than the original offense. Kang Iseon agreed with the observation and returned to the library to add the swordswoman's confirmation to the research file. Yen Sualing joined the work in the library that evening and contributed a list of the Ho family's current senior members, compiled from market gossip and trader networks. The current Ho patriarch was named Ho Tianbo, 64 years old, operating from the capital with 3 sons and 2 daughters in active business roles. The eldest son had inherited the responsibility for old family matters, which meant that any move against the manor would likely come through that specific individual. The eldest son was named Ho Renyang, 38 years old, recently appointed to a junior position in the Imperial Trade Office. Lady Qin Yuhua arrived at the manor on the morning of the 18th day, as agreed, accompanied by 2 attendants and a small honor guard of 4 mounted soldiers in Qin colors. The visit was conducted with full ceremony, and Yen Suoling supervised the preparations down to the placement of every cushion in the reception hall. Hu Meilan handled the practical side with the brisk competence of someone who had been preparing for the visit for 2 weeks. The noble inspected the manor's main rooms with genuine interest and lingered in the library for nearly 2 hours examining the older volumes. Mo Qingzhi served as the noble's guide through the library, and the 2 women discovered a shared passion for a particular school of pre-dynastic calligraphy. Lady Qin Yuhua expressed admiration for Mo Qingzhi's expertise without inquiring into the dancer's origins. The conversation in the library continued past the scheduled time, and Kang Iseon observed from the doorway with quiet satisfaction. Lady Qin Yuhua finally emerged from the library at the 5th hour and complimented Kang Iseon on the household's intellectual depth. The formal meal was served in the main hall at the 7th hour, and Yen Sualing sat at the table for the first time since the awakening in the capacity of a senior household member. Lady Qin Yuhua observed the aristocrat throughout the meal with quiet interest, and at one point asked Kang Iseon the family name of the lady at the table. Kang Iseon answered with a prepared cover, which was that Yen Sualing came from a long-retired branch of an old country line. Lady Qin Yuhua accepted the answer with a small smile that suggested partial belief at most. The noble departed at the 3rd hour after midnight, with another invitation extended for Kang Iseon to visit the Qin estate in the capital within the next 3 months. The carriage rolled down the hill, and Yan Suoling turned to Kang Iseon in the empty courtyard with a quiet observation. The aristocrat noted that Lady Qin Yuhua had recognized the Yan family bearing despite the cover story, and had chosen not to press the matter for reasons of her own. Ho Renyang's first move arrived at the manor gate 11 days after Lady Qin Yuhua's departure in the form of an imperial trade office summons. The document was delivered by a uniformed courier and ordered the legal owner of the Eastern Hill Manor to appear in person at the regional trade office within 5 days. The stated reason was a tax audit of all properties valued at over 2,000 silver in the Ryusan district. Yen Suoling read the summons twice and identified the procedural irregularity within the count of 10. The audit had been authorized by Ho Renyang personally, rather than by the standard regional inspector. Kang Iseon asked whether the summons could be refused, and Yen Suling answered that refusal would generate a warrant within 7 days. The decision was made to comply, but with full preparation against any trap waiting at the regional office. Mo Qingji prepared a complete accounting of the manor's finances, from the original purchase through the most recent silver expenditure on the smith. The record showed clean ownership, paid taxes through Pao Rinshu's earlier waiver, and one legitimate auction sale. Lady Qin Yuhua was contacted through the Jade Token's authorized courier system within the same day. The reply arrived 2 days later, in the form of a sealed letter and a second Jade Token of higher rank than the first. The higher token granted the bearer the protection of the Qin clan in any official proceeding within the empire's eastern provinces. Yen Suling examined the new token and confirmed the authenticity by the specific cutting pattern of the jade. The journey to the regional trade office was scheduled for the 4th day after the summons arrived. Kang Iseon departed with Yan Suoling and Mo Qingzhi at the 2nd hour after dawn, in a hired carriage with 2 outriders. Bai Hualing was offered a place in the escort and declined in favor of remaining at the manor with the newly completed obsidian sword. The first of Zhao Bingshen's 3 blades had been delivered to the swordswoman on the previous evening, with a quiet ceremony in the courtyard. The weapon was now strapped across Bai Hualing's back as the carriage rolled down the hill. The regional trade office occupied a stone building 3 streets from the auction house, and the waiting room was already busy with other summoned property holders. Kang Iseon presented the summons at the registration desk and was directed to a 2nd-floor office where Ho Renyang waited in person behind a polished black desk. The eldest Hao son was tall and lean, with a face that gave nothing away across the introductions. The audit began with a request for the manor's financial records, and Mo Qingzhi delivered the prepared accounting in a neat folder. Hao Renyang examined the records for the span of perhaps 20 minutes without speaking. The questions began at the 21st minute, and ranged from the source of the original 800 copper coins to the precise identity of the seller of the recently auctioned treatise. Kang Iseon answered each question within the bounds of the prepared cover stories. Hao Renyang noted each answer in a personal record, and finally raised the question that the audit had been designed to reach. The question concerned the household composition, and specifically the identities of the women currently residing at the manor. Yen Suoling stepped forward before Kang Iseon could answer and presented the higher Qin token to Hao Renyang directly across the desk. The token was placed face up on the polished black surface with an easy view of any observer entering the office. Hao Renyang's expression shifted by exactly 1 small degree at the recognition of the cutting pattern. The audit was concluded within 5 minutes after the token's appearance, and Hao Renyang issued a clean certificate of tax compliance without further inquiry. The certificate was sealed and stamped and handed to Kang Iseon with a polite formality that did not reach the eyes. The party departed the office with the certificate secured in the carriage's inner compartment. Yen Suoling observed during the ride back that Hao Renyang had recorded the token's serial number in the personal record before the audit ended. The implication was that the Hao family now knew of the formal Qin patronage and would adjust future moves accordingly. The return to the manor was reached at the 8th hour of the evening, and Bai Hualing met the carriage at the gate with a different report. A second visitor had arrived during the absence, in the form of a single woman traveling on foot from the southern road. The visitor had presented herself at the gate with the claim of being a distant relative of one of the sealed lineages seeking shelter. Bai Hualing had refused entry until the household returned, and had quartered the visitor in the gatehouse under polite watch. Kang Iseon walked directly to the gatehouse with Yen Suoling and Mo Qingzhi to assess the new arrival. The visitor was a young woman of perhaps 19, with travel-worn clothes, a long braid of pale brown hair, and a small leather satchel containing what looked like family papers. The introduction came in a clear voice with the name Lin Wanqing and the family claim of being the great-great-granddaughter of Bai Hualing's younger sister. Bai Hualing entered the gatehouse at the announcement of the name and examined Lin Wanqing's face for the span of perhaps 15 seconds. The resemblance was confirmed by the swordswoman with quiet certainty, and Lin Wanqing was invited inside the manor for proper conversation. The papers in the leather satchel included a genealogical scroll, 2 old letters in the original Bai family hand, and a small jade pendant that Bai Hualing recognized as a personal piece from the original century. Lin Wanqing explained that the surviving branch of the Bai family had maintained the records and the pendant across the 6 centuries, with the hope that the sealed ancestor might one day be released. The recent rumors from Ryusan about the manor's new owner had reached the branch within the past month, and Lin Wanqing had volunteered to make the journey alone. Bai Hualing accepted the genealogical claim and embraced the descendant with a brief warmth that Kang Iseon had not previously seen in the swordswoman. Yen Suoling observed the exchange from the doorway and offered a quiet word to Kang Iseon about the implications. The implication was that the other 4 sealed lineages would likely produce similar descendants within the coming months, as word spread of the awakening. The manor's circle was about to expand in directions that no one had specifically planned for. Kang Iseon invited Lin Wanqing to remain at the manor as a guest for as long as the visit served the new relative's purposes. Lin Wanqing's second morning at the manor began with Bai Hualing teaching the descendant a forgotten Bai family sword form in the rear courtyard. The lesson drew an audience of 3 within the first hour. Shen Yue watched from the wall with the borrowed thin blade across the knees. Mo Qingzhi observed from the upper balcony with a cup of tea in hand. Yen Suoling passed through the courtyard on the way to the library and paused for 2 full minutes before continuing. The form was the 3 currents of the Western River, taught only to direct Bai descendants in the original century. Lin Wanqing learned the opening sequence within the first hour, and the second sequence within the second hour. Bai Hualing's voice carried a warmth that Kang Iseon had not heard in any prior lesson with anyone. The instruction continued through the morning, and the swordswoman skipped the midday meal to extend the session. The first sign of trouble appeared at the late afternoon, when Shen Yue sat alone at the side of the rear courtyard, cleaning a hunting knife with unusual force. Kang Iseon approached the warrior with a careful question about the state of the perimeter patrol. Shun Ye answered in clipped sentences that suggested the conversation was not actually welcome. The patrol had found nothing unusual. The eastern slope was clear, and the southern road carried only the normal traffic for the season. Kang Iseon sat down on the bench beside Shun Ye without further questions and waited in silence. The wait lasted perhaps 3 minutes before the warrior set down the knife and spoke without looking up. The statement was that no descendant of the Shen lineage would ever come to the manor because the original Shen Yue had killed every member of the immediate family before the sealing. Kang Iseon received the information without immediate response, and only after a slow breath asked the warrior to continue if continuing was wanted. Shen Yue did continue, and the story emerged in compressed pieces over the next 20 minutes. The killing had been a final act of mercy to prevent the family from being used as leverage in the conflict that led to the sealing. The Shen family had been small, and the children had been very young. Shen Ye had carried the memory across 6 centuries of stone sleep, and had hoped at some level that the awakening would bring forgetfulness. The awakening had brought clarity instead, and the morning's lesson in the courtyard had stripped the last protection of distance from the memory. Kang Iseon listened to the end of the accounts and offered no consolation, because none would have served. The warrior wiped the eyes once with the back of a hand, and then picked up the knife again and resumed the cleaning. The conversation ended with a single statement from Shen Yue, which was a request that no descendant of any other lineage be brought into the manor without prior warning to those whose families had not survived. Kang Iseon agreed to the request and walked directly to the library where Yen Suoling was reading by lamplight. The conversation with the aristocrat lasted nearly an hour and covered the implications of Shen Yue's request for the future composition of the household. Yan Suoling acknowledged that the Yan family had likely survived, but that the surviving branch would be deeply hostile to the original Yan Suoling for reasons of historical politics. Mo Qingzhi joined the library conversation at the second hour and confirmed that the Mo school had been hereditary and that any descendant would be a serious cultivator already. The discussion produced a working policy that any descendant claim would be vetted by the relevant sealed woman before being granted access to the manor. The policy was written down by Mo Qingzhi and posted on the kitchen wall, where Hu Meilan could enforce it at the gate. Lin Wanqing was informed of the policy that evening and accepted it with an apology for the trouble that the visit had caused. Bai Hualing dismissed the apology and continued the sword lessons on the following morning. The second crack appeared on the 4th day after Lin Wanqing's arrival, when a sealed letter from the capital arrived addressed to Yen Suoling personally. The letter bore the seal of the surviving Yen branch, and the contents were brief and uncompromising. The branch demanded a formal meeting at a neutral location within 30 days to discuss the original Yen Suoling status under current clan law. Yen Suoling read the letter twice in the main hall with Kang Iseon present, and then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. The aristocrat explained without emotion that the surviving branch had ascended to power 6 centuries ago by denouncing the original Yen Suoling as a traitor to the imperial court. The current clan position required that the original Yen Suoling either accept formal denunciation or face challenge through the clan's enforcement arm. Kang Iseon asked what the enforcement arm consisted of in the current century, and Yen Suoling answered with 2 names. The first name was a senior elder named Yan Mingzhe, 92 years old, 3rd rank cultivator, retired from active duty. The second name was the current enforcement captain, a woman named Yan Li Rong, 34 years old, 5th rank cultivator, and the actual threat. The third event of the week came in the form of Rin breaking silence for the first significant conversation since the awakening. The priestess approached Kang Iseon in the corridor outside the bedroom at the 3rd hour after midnight and requested a private audience in the reading room. Rin spoke quietly and slowly, with the careful diction of someone using the voice after long disuse. The priestess explained that the binding's energy flow had begun to show small irregularities in the past 3 days that suggested external probing by an unknown party. The probing was subtle and would not have been detected by anyone without specific training in the binding's design. Rin had identified the probing's signature as belonging to a single hereditary lineage of binding scholars. The lineage was the Black Readers, which matched the third threat that Wu Yingxia had identified weeks earlier. Kang Iseon absorbed the news and asked whether the current Black Reader could be identified by name. Rin answered that the name was not yet clear, but that the probing pattern suggested a person of middle years operating from a fixed location rather than traveling. The location was somewhere within the eastern provinces and would become identifiable within a few weeks of continued observation. Yen Suoling drafted the formal reply to the surviving Yen branch on the morning after the priestess's warning. The reply accepted the proposed meeting and named a neutral location of Yen Suoling's own choosing, rather than one selected by the branch. The chosen location was an old shrine of the river spirits, located halfway between Rusan and the provincial capital. The shrine sat on land owned by neither the manor nor the Yan branch, and held a long tradition of neutrality for clan disputes. The date proposed was 24 days forward, which gave both parties time to travel and prepare. The letter was sealed with Yan Suoling's personal mark, recovered from a hidden compartment in the cellar, and sent by the manor's regular courier. Kang Iseon spent the same morning in the library with Mo Qingzhi, reviewing every available text on the Black Reader's hereditary techniques. The available material was thin because the lineage had always operated through oral transmission rather than written record. 3 references in older volumes confirmed the basic methodology and named 2 historical Black Readers by their working aliases. Wu Yingxia joined the library work at the second hour and contributed a single observation that proved more useful than all the written material combined. The anchor form stated that any active probing of the binding could be traced back to its source if the receiving side cooperated rather than resisted. Rin was called to the library, and the technique was explained in technical terms that only the priestess fully understood. The cooperation would expose the manor's binding pattern to the Black Reader more clearly during the trace period. The risk was real, but the gain was the Black Reader's identity and physical location within perhaps 3 days. Kang Iseon weighed the trade and authorized the trace under one condition. The condition was that Wu Yingxia would monitor the binding directly during the trace and break the connection at the first sign of damage. Rin accepted the condition, and the trace was scheduled for the following midnight, when the binding's natural energy was lowest. The trace began at the appointed hour, with Rin seated in the cellar before the obsidian altar, and Wu Yingxia standing at the threshold. Kang Iseon observed from the second step of the cellar stairs, with Yan Suoling at the shoulder. The procedure took 47 minutes by the count of the water clock that Mo Qingzhi had set up in the corner. Rin emerged from the trance state with a name written on a small slip of paper and a precise location described in 3 sentences. The name was He Wen Liu, and the location was a private estate on the southern shore of Lake Sunhe, which sat 4 days of travel east of Ryusan. The estate was described as walled, gated, and staffed by perhaps 20 people, including at least 3 cultivators of significant rank. Yen Suoling read the name and confirmed that the He family had been associated with binding scholarship for over 1,000 years. The current He Wen Liu was likely between 40 and 50 years of age, based on the energy signature. Kang Iseon considered the situation overnight and convened a planning session in the main hall on the following morning. The participants were Yan Suling, Mo Qingzhi, Rin, Bai Hualing, Shen Yue, Wu Yinxia, and Hu Meilan. Lin Wanqing was invited as an observer because the descendants' presence had already shifted the household dynamics significantly. Kang Iseon opened with a summary of the 3 active threats: The Wei family was containable through Lady Qin Yuhua's continued patronage. The Ho family was active but moving slowly through official channels. The Black Reader was the most dangerous because direct interference with the binding could free or destroy the sealed forms at the reader's choice. Bai Hualing proposed a direct strike at Lake Shunhe before He Wenliu could complete the probing. Yan Suling counterproposed a diplomatic approach because the Black Reader's tradition required formal contact before any major intervention. Mo Qingji suggested combining the two by sending a formal inquiry that doubled as reconnaissance for a later strike if the inquiry failed. The combined approach was accepted, and the formal inquiry was drafted within the hour. Kang Iseon signed the inquiry as the legal owner of the manor, and the document was sealed for delivery. The courier selected for the journey was Shen Yue, who would travel in plain clothes as an ordinary messenger. The warrior would carry the inquiry to Lake Shunhe, observe the estate from a distance, and return with a verbal report, regardless of the reader's response. Shen Yue departed on the second morning after the planning session, with 3 days of supplies and a horse purchased from the Ryusan stables. The household settled into a tense rhythm during the warrior's absence. Bai Hualing continued the sword lessons with Lin Wanqing, and the descendant absorbed the third sequence of the 3 currents form within 4 days. Mo Qingji began a parallel research project on the Yan clan's current political situation in preparation for the shrine meeting. Yan Sualing spent long hours in the cellar with Wu Yinxia, reviewing old records that the inspector's papers had referenced. Shen Yue returned on the 8th day with a verbal report and a written response from He Wenliu. The Black Reader had received the warrior personally at the estate gate, and had spoken for nearly an hour in courteous terms. The probing had been preliminary and exploratory rather than hostile, motivated by professional curiosity about an awakening that the lineage had recorded as theoretically possible, but never expected. The written response confirmed the inquiry's reception and proposed a personal meeting at the manor within 60 days. He Wenliu offered guarantees of non-interference during the meeting and a binding pledge against any future action without the manor's consent. Kang Iseon read the response 3 times and consulted Yan Sualing and Wu Yinxia separately before responding. Both advisors agreed that the offer appeared genuine and that the Black Reader's professional pride would make any betrayal of the pledge a serious loss of standing in the lineage's tradition. The acceptance was sent the following morning, with a proposed date of 54 days forward. The shrine meeting with the Yan branch arrived first at 24 days. Yan Sualing traveled with Kang Iseon, Bai Hualing, and Mo Qingzhi in a carriage with a single Qin outrider provided by Lady Qin Yuhua. The shrine was old and quiet, and the Yan branch delegation arrived within an hour of the manor party. The delegation consisted of the elder Yan Mingzi, the captain Yan Lirong, and 3 junior cultivators of unknown rank. The opening exchange was formal and cold. Yan Mingzi presented the branch's case for denunciation and demanded that Yan Sualing either accept the denunciation in writing or face the captain in formal challenge. Yan Sualing refused the denunciation in plain terms and accepted the challenge for the 3rd hour of the same afternoon. Yan Lirong drew the clan sword at the 3rd hour and stepped onto the gravel circle in front of the shrine without ceremony. The captain wore the dark green uniform of the Yan enforcement arm, with a single silver cord across the shoulder marking the 5th rank. Yan Sualing stepped onto the gravel from the opposite side in a plain traveling robe with no visible weapon. Bai Hualing offered the obsidian blade before the match, and Yan Sualing declined with a small shake of the head. The aristocrat raised both empty hands at the center of the circle and waited for the captain to commit. Yan Lirong studied the unarmed stance for the span of perhaps 5 seconds, and then attacked without further hesitation. The first exchange was a single thrust aimed at the throat that Yan Sualing deflected with a brushing motion of the left palm. The deflection moved the captain's blade by perhaps 3 finger widths, but no more. Kang Iseon watched from the spectator line and understood within the first exchange that Yan Suoling was operating at a level not previously demonstrated at the manor. The second exchange lasted 7 heartbeats and involved 9 separate strikes from Yan Li-rong against an opponent who never moved more than a foot in any direction. The captain disengaged after the 9th strike to reassess the situation. Yan Mingze called out a single word from the spectator line, and Yan Li-rong nodded once before resuming the engagement. The third exchange brought a different technique that Mo Qingze identified in a low whisper as the Yan family's hidden pulse method. The technique sent invisible pressure waves ahead of each strike to disorient the opponent's defensive timing. Yan Suoling absorbed the first pressure wave with a small adjustment of the breath, and the second with a slight shift of the foot. The captain's third pressure wave was deflected back along its own path and struck Yan Li-rong in the chest with enough force to drive the captain back 2 steps. The aristocrat had not so much as taken a forward step during any of the exchanges. The fourth and final exchange ended with Yan Li-rong on one knee, with the clan's sword pinned to the gravel by Yan Suoling's bare palm pressed against the flat of the blade. The captain was permitted to rise, and the sword was returned without further humiliation. Yan Li-rong bowed at the depth required by the dueling code and acknowledged the loss to the seniority of the older form. Yan Mingze stepped forward at the conclusion and addressed Yan Suoling directly for the first time since the opening exchange. The elder acknowledged the demonstration and proposed an alternative resolution in place of the denunciation. The proposal was that the original Yan Suoling would accept a formal position as honorary ancestor of the surviving branch, rather than be denounced. The position would carry no operational authority, but would restore the family record and remove the historical stain on the original name. Yan Suoling considered the proposal for the span of perhaps 30 seconds and accepted with one condition. The condition was that the surviving branch would withdraw all support and contact from the Ho family within the next 60 days. Yan Mingze agreed without consulting the captain, and the agreement was drafted on the spot by the shrine's resident scribe. The return journey to the manor was completed in 2 days at a relaxed pace. Yan Suoling spoke very little during the ride, and Kang Iseon did not press the silence. Mo Qingze observed quietly to Kang Iseon at one of the overnight stops that the demonstration at the shrine had revealed only a fraction of the aristocrat's actual capability. The dancer estimated Yan Suoling's true rank at no lower than the 6th and possibly the 7th. Kang Iseon filed the estimate away without immediate comment. The manor was reached at the 8th hour of the second evening, and the household received the news of the agreement with quiet satisfaction. Rin reported that the Black Reader's probing had ceased entirely on the morning of the shrine duel, which suggested that He Wen-lu had been monitoring the situation closely. Hu Mei-lan delivered the day's accumulated correspondence, and the stack included a fresh letter from Lady Qin Yuhua with information about Ho family movements in the capital. The Ho letter contained 3 significant items. The first was a confirmation that Ho Ren-yang had been promoted within the Imperial Trade Office to a senior auditor position. The promotion gave the eldest Ho son authority over property investigations across the entire eastern region, rather than just the Ryusan district. The second item was the news that Ho Tianbo had personally traveled from the capital to inspect a family property near Lake Shenhe within the past 2 weeks. The proximity to He Wen-lu's estate was almost certainly not coincidental. The third item was a warning that the Ho family had begun quiet inquiries through Capital Noble channels about Lady Qin Yuhua's recent activities. The patron was prepared to maintain the alliance, but suggested that visible coordination should be reduced for the coming months. Yan Suoling read the letter and offered the assessment that the Ho family was preparing a larger move with multiple coordinated elements. Kang Iseon agreed and requested a complete defensive review of the manor within the next 10 days. The defensive review was conducted by Yen Suoling, Mo Qingji, Rin, and Wu Yingxia over the course of 7 days. The findings were presented to Kang Iseon in the main hall on the morning of the 8th day. The manor's perimeter seals required substantial reinforcement that would consume the remaining materials from Hu Meilan's earlier purchases. The cellar altar required restoration of 2 damaged carvings that Zhao Bingshun could complete within 5 days. The library required cataloging and concealment of the most sensitive volumes that Mo Qingzhi could complete within 10 days. The household required at least 3 additional capable defenders, given the rising threat level. The last item generated the most discussion, because no obvious candidates existed within the current circle. Lin Wanqing volunteered her own service for the duration of the crisis and offered to bring 2 cousins from the Bai branch who held active military commissions in the eastern provinces. Bai Hualing supported the offer, and Kang Iseon accepted with thanks. The 2 cousins were sent for by formal letter the same afternoon and were expected to arrive within 12 days. A second knock came at the manor gate on the same evening from a traveler Hu Meilan did not recognize. The visitor was a young woman of perhaps 24, with the bearing of a trained scholar and the dust of long travel on the dark blue robe. The introduction was given in a clear, measured voice, with the name Mo Lianju and the claim of being a direct descendant of Mo Qingzhi through the dancer's older brother's line. Mo Qingzhi was summoned to the gate, and the verification was completed within 20 minutes through specific family questions that only a true descendant could answer. The descendant was accepted into the manor and assigned a guest room in the eastern wing. The Ho strike came 11 days after Mo Lianju's arrival, in the form of a coordinated assault on 3 fronts at once. The first front opened in the capital, where the Imperial Trade Office issued a formal seizure order against the Eastern Hill Manor, citing newly discovered tax irregularities. The order was signed by Ho Renyang in his new senior auditor capacity and bypassed the regional level entirely. The second front opened in Ryusan, where the Iron Wing Security Company received a contract from an anonymous client to blockade the road to the manor. The blockade was nominally civilian and based on a fabricated trade dispute that gave legal cover for the deployment. The third front was military in nature and consisted of a private armed force of 40 men marching from a Ho property in the neighboring province toward the manor. The force was under the command of the second Ho son, named Ho Renqi, 34 years old, a 4th-rank cultivator with active combat experience. The 3 fronts were timed to arrive at the manor within 48 hours of each other. The intelligence reached Kang Iseon through 3 separate channels on the same morning. The capital order came through Lady Qin Yuhua's emergency courier system. The blockade news came through Hu Meilan's village contacts, who had been bribing Iron Wing's lower ranks for weeks. The military intelligence came from one of Lin Wanqing's Bai cousins, who had arrived 4 days earlier and maintained contact with the Eastern military networks. The cousin was named Lin Daohan, and the second cousin was named Lin Daoyu, both holding active captain commissions, and both proving immediately useful in defensive planning. Kang Iseon convened an emergency council in the main hall within an hour of the third intelligence arriving. The participants included every member of the household, plus Zhao Bingshun and the 2 Lin cousins. The strategic assessment was completed within 3 hours, and the operational decisions were made within 5. The capital order would be challenged through Lady Qin Yuhua's legal team, with a counterfiling within 24 hours. The blockade would be broken by a direct legal challenge backed by the Qin protection token presented at the regional governor's office. The military force would be met before reaching the manor at a chosen ground that favored the defense. The chosen ground was a narrow pass 3 hours' march south of the manor, on the only road wide enough for a force of 40 to maintain formation. The pass had been used in old centuries for similar purposes, and Yan Suoling knew its features in detail. The defensive force was organized within the same evening. Bai Hualing would lead with the obsidian blade now properly fitted to her hand. Shen Yue would take the second obsidian blade that Zhao Bingshun had completed 3 days earlier. Yan Suoling would command the engagement from the rear, with overall tactical authority. Mo Qingju would deploy her binding spiral against the Ho cultivator at the appropriate moment. Rin would remain at the manor to maintain the seals during the engagement. The Lin cousins would lead a flanking element of 12 hired militia from the village. Hu Meilan had been quietly building the militia roster for 3 weeks as a precaution, and the men were now mobilized within hours. Lin Wanqing requested a place in the main line, and Bai Hualing accepted after a single hard look that contained both pride and concern. The march to the pass began at the 3rd hour of the next morning. Kang Iseon traveled with the main force in plain armor and carried a short sword of standard issue, rather than any cultivator weapon. The legal owner of the manor needed to be present at the engagement for the political record, but would not personally fight. Wu Yingxiao remained at the manor with Rin and Mo Lianzhu to coordinate the defensive seals. The pass was reached at the 6th hour, and the defensive positions were established within the hour after that. The Hao force was sighted on the road at the 8th hour, and Hao Renqi rode at the head of the column on a tall, dark horse. The cultivator wore lacquered black armor with the Hao family crest in silver across the chest. The column halted at the agreed challenge distance, and Hao Renqi rode forward with 2 officers to issue the formal demand for surrender. The demand was that Kang Iseon personally surrender to Hao custody for transport to the capital pending the trade office investigation. The refusal was issued by Yan Suoling in the aristocrat's clearest formal voice from the defensive position. The engagement began at the 9th hour with a charge of the Hao main force into the narrow pass. Bai Hualing met the leading element with the obsidian blade, and the first 3 Hao soldiers fell within 10 heartbeats. Shen Yue worked the right flank with the second obsidian blade, and the Lin cousins anchored the left flank with the village militia. Hu Renqi committed to personal engagement at the 20th heartbeat and crossed swords with Bai Hualing at the center of the pass. The duel between cultivator and swordswoman lasted nearly 4 minutes and demonstrated to all watchers that the obsidian blade had elevated Bai Hualing's effective rank substantially. The strike that ended the duel came from Shen Yue at the critical moment when Hu Renqi's attention had locked on Bai Hualing's footwork. The second obsidian blade entered the Ho cultivator's side beneath the armor's lacquered plate, and the wound was immediately fatal. The Ho force broke within the minute that followed and fled back down the road in disorder. The defenders held the ground without pursuit on Yan Suoling's specific order. The casualty count on the defensive side was 3 village militia killed and 7 wounded. The Ho force had lost 11 killed, including the second son, and at least 20 wounded among the retreating column. Kang Iseon ordered the burial of the militia dead at the pass with full honors paid for from manor funds. The wounded were transported back to the manor for treatment by Rin, who held practical medical training from the old century. The return march was completed by the 2nd hour after midnight, and the manor received the returning force with quiet relief. Lin Wanqing had taken a shallow cut across the upper arm during the engagement, and Bai Hualing personally cleaned and bound the wound in the main hall. The political consequences of killing a Ho son began arriving within hours through Lady Qin Yuhua's couriers. The Ho patriarch had publicly declared a blood feud against the manor and against the Qin clan for the death of Ho Renqi. The capital seizure order had been formally challenged by the Qin legal team within the agreed time frame. The Iron Wing blockade had collapsed by the time the regional governor reviewed the protection token at the 3rd hour of the day. The first 2 fronts had been defeated cleanly, and the 3rd front had been broken in the field. The cost had been 3 village deaths and the opening of an open war with the Ho patriarch. He Wenliu arrived at the manor gate on the agreed date with a single attendant and a sealed wooden case carried personally. The Black Reader was a man in his middle 40s, with a lean frame, a long, dark robe of plain cut, and graying hair pulled into a simple knot. The face carried no marks of either pride or aggression, and the bearing was that of a scholar receiving a colleague rather than a guest. Hu Meilan escorted the visitor to the main hall, where Kang Iseon waited with Yan Suoling, Wu Yingxia, and Rin already seated at the long table. Bai Hualing stood at the door in plain clothes, without visible weapon, as a courtesy to the agreed pledge. He Wenliu took the seat offered at the opposite end of the table, and placed the wooden case on the polished wood within easy reach of both parties. The opening exchange was formal and brief. The Black Reader expressed gratitude for the audience and apologized for any disturbance caused by the earlier probing. Kang Iseon acknowledged the apology and invited He Wenliu to state the purpose of the visit in plain terms. The purpose was stated in 3 sentences. The He lineage had recorded the original binding as the most complete and most stable example in the lineage's working archive. The awakening had been observed within hours of its occurrence through long-established monitoring techniques. The He lineage wished to formalize a non-interference agreement that would preserve both the lineage's professional reputation and the manor's autonomy. The wooden case contained the proposed agreement in 2 identical copies, and a small jade fragment described as a binding anchor for the lineage's pledge. Yan Suling read the agreement clause by clause across the next 40 minutes. Wu Yingxia examined the jade fragment with a fingertip and confirmed the construction as authentic to the lineage's known technique. Rin studied the binding implications of the pledge anchor in silence for the same period. The verdict from all 3 advisors was that the agreement was genuine and the protection offered was real. Kang Iseon signed both copies at the 2nd hour after He Wenliu's arrival and retained 1 copy for the manor archive. The conversation that followed the signing proved more useful than the agreement itself. He Wenliu offered information about the Ho family's current activity in the capital that Lady Qin Yuhua's channels had not yet collected. The Ho patriarch had contracted a sealing specialist from a rival lineage for the express purpose of attacking the manor's binding. The specialist was named Cao Bei Jiao and operated from a private temple in the southern provinces. Cao Bei Jiao was not bound by any pledge to the manor and would arrive in the eastern region within 15 days. He Wenliu's lineage considered Cao Bei Jiao a competitor of long standing, and was willing to provide technical countermeasures against the rival's known techniques. The countermeasures were described in detail across the next hour, and Rin took notes throughout. The Black Reader's professional grudge against Cao Bei Jiao was apparently older than the manor itself. Kang Iseon accepted the countermeasures with formal thanks, and He Wenliu departed at the 5th hour of the same afternoon. The wooden case remained on the table, with 1 copy of the agreement and the jade fragment securely placed in a stone box. The Cao Bei Jiao information triggered an immediate planning response within the household. Yan Suoling convened the inner council in the library at the 7th hour, and presented the situation in compressed form. The Ho patriarch had escalated from physical assault to spiritual attack, and the spiritual attack would target the binding directly rather than the household members. The success of such an attack would either kill the sealed forms outright or free them entirely from the manor's anchor. The latter outcome was potentially worse than the former, because free, sealed forms with no anchor would lose physical stability within days. Mo Qingzhi confirmed the prognosis from the texts, and added that the lineage records of such failures described a slow dissolution rather than a quick death. The defensive priority was therefore the protection of the binding itself rather than any single member of the household. Rin and Wu Yingxia took joint responsibility for the binding protection, using He Wenliu's countermeasures. The rest of the household would focus on identifying and neutralizing Cao Beijiao before the spiritual attack could be launched. Lin Daohan and Lin Daoyu were sent into the eastern region with 2 militia each to track Cao Beijiao's approach from the south. Shen Yue traveled separately along a different route to provide a second confirmation of the specialist movements. Hu Meilan activated every village contact and trader network available to the manor for information on unusual southern travelers. Lady Qin Yuhua was informed of the new threat by emergency courier and responded within 2 days with the offer of a Qin scout team to assist the search. The offer was accepted, and the scout team was integrated with the existing search structure under Yan Suoling's coordination. The search began on the 3rd day after He Wenliu's visit and produced its first results on the 7th day. Cao Beijiao had been spotted at an inn in the small town of Shangzhou, approximately 5 days' travel south of the manor. The specialist traveled with 3 attendants in a small ritual cart, loaded with sealed boxes. Shen Yue confirmed the sighting in person and reported a description that matched the records held by He Wenliu's lineage. The decision was made to intercept Cao Beijiao before any spiritual attack could begin. Bai Hualing led the interception force, consisting of herself, Shen Yue, both Lin cousins, and 4 Qin scouts. Kang Iseon did not accompany the interception because the legal owner needed to remain at the manor for the binding central anchor function. Yan Suoling also remained for tactical coordination at the manor end. The interception force departed at the 3rd hour after the sighting confirmation and traveled fast on hired horses. The target was reached on the morning of the 3rd day at a small wooden bridge outside the village of Renhai. Cao Beijiao's cart was crossing the bridge with the 3 attendants when the interception force closed both ends of the bridge simultaneously. The specialist saw the trap within seconds and attempted to launch a defensive ritual from the cart. Bai Hualing reached the cart before the ritual could complete, and the obsidian blade ended Cao Beijiao's career with a single clean cut. The 3 attendants surrendered without resistance and were taken into custody for transport back to the manor. The ritual cart and its sealed boxes were confiscated entirely. The interception force returned to the manor at the 8th day after departure, with the prisoners and the cart secured. A formal imperial summons arrived at the manor gate 8 days after the interception force returned with the captured ritual cart. The document was delivered by a uniformed imperial courier riding under banner protection and carried the personal seal of the Eastern Regional Commissioner. The summons required Kang Iseon to appear in person at the regional commission seat in the city of Jinhe within 20 days. The stated purpose was a formal hearing on the death of Ho Renqi and the related blood feud declaration by Ho Tianbo. The hearing would be conducted under imperial law rather than clan law, which removed the matter from the whole family's direct control. The summons also required the presence of any witnesses to the engagement at the pass and the production of all relevant evidence. Yan Suoling read the document twice and identified the procedural structure as legitimate. The imperial court had clearly decided to intervene before the feud could escalate further. Kang Iseon sent a courier to Lady Qin Yuhua's nearest residence within the hour, requesting urgent consultation on the proper response. The reply from Lady Qin Yuhua arrived 4 days later with a complete strategic assessment and an offer of full legal representation at the hearing. The Qin clan would provide a senior advocate from the capital named Ma Zhenshu, who had handled similar feud hearings for the clan across the previous 20 years. The advocate would arrive at the manor within 3 days of the formal acceptance. Lady Qin Yuhua also offered her personal attendance at the hearing as a character witness for the manor's legitimate operation. The offer was accepted in full, and the formal acceptance was sent to the regional commissioner within the same day. Ma Zhenshu arrived at the manor on the 7th day after the summons, with a small team of 3 junior advocates and a heavy chest of legal references. The advocate was a man in his late 50s, with the polished manner of long capital practice, and the quick eyes of someone who missed very little. The preparation for the hearing began on the morning of the 8th day and continued without break for the following 6 days. The case strategy was built around 3 core arguments developed by Ma Zhenshu in consultation with Yan Suoling. The first argument established the legitimacy of the manor's ownership through the original sale, the tax compliance certificate, and the Qin patronage agreement. The second argument framed the engagement at the pass as a defensive action against an unprovoked armed invasion by a private force without imperial authorization. The third argument shifted responsibility for the death of Ho Renqi onto the Ho Patriarch for ordering an illegal military movement across provincial boundaries. The evidence package included the original property deed, the tax certificate, the Qin patronage agreement, the captured Iron Wing contracts recovered from the blockade, the sealed ritual cart with Cao Beijiao's contents, and sworn statements from 12 witnesses, including the surviving village militia. Ma Zhenshu rehearsed Kang Iseon through the expected examination format for 2 full days and corrected every weak phrasing. Yan Suoling drilled the witness statements with the village militia until each man could deliver the testimony in the formal court register. Lin Wanqing approached Kang Iseon in the courtyard on the evening before the departure for Jinhe with a private request. The request was permission to accompany the party to the hearing as a personal witness to the descendant relationship with Bai Hualing. The presence of a lineage descendant in good standing would help establish the manor as a legitimate cultural institution, rather than a suspicious, irregular household. Kang Iseon agreed to the request, and Lin Wanqing was added to the traveling party. The departure was made at the 2nd hour after dawn on the 15th day after the summons. The party included Kang Iseon, Yan Suoling, Mo Qingzhi, Bai Hualing, Lin Wanqing, Ma Zhenshu and his junior advocates, and a Qin honor guard of 12 mounted soldiers. Rin remained at the manor with Wu Yingsha, Shen Ye, the Lin cousins, Hu Meilan, Zhao Bingshun, and Mo Lianzhu to maintain defenses and continue research. The journey to Jinhe took 4 days at the formal travel pace required by the summons. The party arrived at the Regional Commission compound on the morning of the 19th day, and was assigned formal lodging within the Commission's guest quarters. The hearing convened at the 2nd hour of the 20th day in the Commission's main chamber. The presiding officer was Regional Commissioner Tang Yuanhe, a man in his late 50s with the bearing of long imperial service and a reputation for procedural strictness. The Ho family was represented by Ho Tianbo, in person, accompanied by his eldest son, Ho Ranyang, and a team of 4 capital advocates. Lady Qin Yuhua attended personally as promised, and her presence in the witness section drew visible reaction from the Ho party. The proceedings opened with the formal reading of the charges and the formal entry of Kang Iseon's not guilty plea. Ho Tianbo's lead advocate presented the family's case across the next 3 hours with considerable skill. The case framed the manor as a hostile, irregular institution that had murdered a legitimate Ho family member during a lawful trade dispute. Ma Zhenshu responded with a prepared defense across the next 4 hours and dismantled the Ho case piece by piece. The captured Iron Wing contracts proved devastating because the documents named Ho Tianbo personally as the contracting principal. The sealed ritual cart proved equally damaging when Cao Beijiao's identity and contracted purpose were established through He Wenliu's professional testimony, delivered by written deposition. Commissioner Tang Yuanhe adjourned the hearing at the 7th hour for deliberation, and reconvened the chamber at the 2nd hour of the following morning. The verdict was delivered in formal language across nearly 30 minutes of legal recitation. The death of Ho Renqi was ruled lawful self-defense in response to an illegal armed invasion. The blood feud declaration by Ho Tianbo was ruled invalid under imperial law and ordered withdrawn within 3 days. The Ho Patriarch was personally fined 10,000 silver for the illegal military movement, and barred from any official position in the eastern region for a period of 5 years. Ho Ren-yang was suspended from the senior auditor position, pending a separate investigation into the trade office's handling of the manor's tax matters. The verdict closed with a formal commendation of the manor's defensive conduct and Lady Qin Yuhua's responsible patronage. Ho Tianbo accepted the verdict with visible difficulty and departed the chamber without speaking to any of the manor party. Lady Qin Yuhua approached Kang Iseon after the formal adjournment with quiet satisfaction and a small further request. The request was that Kang Iseon and the inner household visit the Qin capital residence within the next 2 months for a formal social presentation. The acceptance was given on the spot, and the manor party departed Jinhe at the 3rd hour of the same afternoon. Ho Tianbo's final move arrived 17 days after the Jinhe verdict in the form of a personal assassination attempt against Kang Iseon. The attempt came not at the manor, but on the road during the formal journey to Lady Qin Yuhua's capital residence. The party had departed the manor at the agreed schedule and was 4 days into the 8-day journey when the strike was launched. The location was a forested stretch of Imperial Road, 2 hours past the town of Beiyang, in a region known for its old battlefield ghosts. The attackers numbered 8 and wore no identifying marks of any family or organization. The leader was a tall woman of perhaps 40, with a long curved blade and the cold efficiency of a professional contractor. The attack was launched at the 3rd hour of the afternoon, when the road was empty of other travelers for at least a half day in either direction. The first arrow killed the lead Qin guard, and the second wounded the second guard in the shoulder. The 8 attackers closed on the carriage from both sides of the road within 30 seconds of the opening volley. Bai Hualing was out of the carriage with the obsidian blade before the 3rd arrow could be loosed. Shen Yue followed within the second heartbeat with the second obsidian blade and took the right flank without conscious coordination. Yang Ling emerged from the second carriage and engaged the attack leader directly with bare hands as at the river shrine. Mo Qingzhi began the binding spiral within 10 seconds of leaving the carriage, and the air around the attackers grew visibly heavier within the count of 30. Kang Iseon remained inside the lead carriage on the explicit prior instruction of the household and drew the short sword only as a final defensive measure. Lin Wanqing took position at the carriage door with a borrowed bow and shot 2 attackers cleanly before they could close to engagement range. The engagement lasted 4 minutes and ended with 7 attackers dead, and the leader captured alive by Yang Ling's careful restraint. The Qin guard lost 3 killed and 4 wounded in the brief but vicious exchange. The captured leader was interrogated by Yang Ling on the spot at the side of the road. The woman gave her name as Liang Yuewei and the contracting party as Ho Tianbo, personally, through an intermediary in the capital underworld. The payment had been 5,000 silver in advance, with 5,000 more upon confirmed death. The contract had been issued in defiance of the imperial verdict and constituted an additional criminal act by the Ho Patriarch. Liang Yuewei surrendered the contact details for the capital intermediary in exchange for a promise of imperial court testimony rather than immediate execution. The deal was accepted, and Liang Yuewei was bound for transport to the regional commission in Jinhe. The wounded Qin guards were treated by Mo Qingzhi using practical field techniques retained from the old century. The party continued the journey to the Qin capital residence after a delay of 6 hours and arrived at the capital on the agreed date despite the interruption. Lady Qin Yuhua received the party at the residence gate with full ceremony and immediate concern for the casualties. The formal social presentation was conducted on the 3rd day after arrival in the Great Hall of the Qin capital residence. The attendance included perhaps 300 capital nobles and senior officials from across the eastern provinces. Kang Iseon was presented as the legal owner of the Eastern Hill Manor and as a personal client of the Qin clan under formal patronage. Yan Suoling was presented as the honorary ancestor of the surviving Yan branch under the agreement signed at the river shrine. Bai Hualing was presented as the household's senior martial advisor, without further specification. Mo Qingzhu was presented as the household's chief scholar and was immediately surrounded by capital calligraphy collectors. The reception lasted until the third hour after midnight and concluded with a formal toast by Lady Qin Yuhua to the manor's continued prosperity. The political effect of the presentation was substantial and was felt within hours through the capital information networks. The manor had been transformed from an obscure regional anomaly into a recognized capital institution with active Qin backing. The Hu family's position in capital society collapsed within the same week as news of the assassination contract reached the regional commission. Commissioner Tong Yuanhe issued a fresh arrest warrant for Hu Tianbo on the 5th day after the assassination attempt, based on Liang Yuewei's testimony. The warrant was executed by imperial constables at the Hu capital residence on the 7th day. Hu Tianbo surrendered without resistance and was transported to Jinhe for trial on the new charges. The trial was scheduled for 30 days forward, and the outcome was considered effectively certain given the evidence. The Ho family's leadership devolved temporarily to a third son named Ho Renxiao, who had no prior involvement in the feud and immediately sued for peace through capital intermediaries. The peace terms negotiated through Lady Qin Yuhua's office included a formal renunciation of the blood feud, a payment of 50,000 silver in reparations to the manor and the families of the dead militia, and a binding agreement against any future Ho action against the manor or its associated households. Kang Iseon signed the peace agreement on the 14th day after the assassination attempt, and the document was filed with the imperial court for permanent record. The capital visit continued for an additional 12 days after the peace signing to consolidate the new political position. Mo Qingzhi made formal arrangements with 3 capital archives for ongoing scholarly exchange. Yan Suoling met privately with senior members of the surviving Yan branch and renegotiated the honorary ancestor agreement with improved terms. Bai Hualing was approached by 2 minor noble houses with formal requests for combat instruction and politely declined both. Lady Qin Yuhua introduced Kang Iseon to the Imperial Trade Office's chief commissioner, who privately confirmed that the Eastern Region investigation would clear the manor of any wrongdoing within 30 days. The party departed the capital at the 26th day after arrival and reached the manor at the 34th day in good condition. Rin and Wu Yinsha reported during the welcome that the binding had remained completely stable throughout the entire absence. Hu Meilan presented a full accounting of household affairs during the period, including the arrival of 2 more descendant claims that had been held pending verification. The first claim was from a Rin descendant traveling from the Sky Temple in the northern mountains. The second claim was from a Yan branch member who had defected from the surviving line specifically to serve the original Yan Suoling. Kang Iseon authorized the verification process for both candidates, and the household settled back into a rhythm changed by the recent success, but not yet at peace. Ho Tianbo's trial opened in Jinhe on the agreed date, with Commissioner Tong Yuanhe presiding over a packed chamber. The case was presented by an imperial prosecutor named Wei Zhongli, rather than by any private advocate. Liang Yuewei delivered the central testimony in person from a guarded witness stand, and produced the original payment ledger as supporting evidence. The capital intermediary named in the earlier interrogation had been arrested 2 weeks earlier and provided corroborating testimony through a sealed deposition. Ho Tianbo offered no substantial defense beyond a formal denial that the chamber did not credit. The verdict was delivered at the close of the 2nd day and was uniformly severe. The Ho patriarch was stripped of all noble titles, fined an additional 30,000 silver, sentenced to 15 years of imperial exile in the far western provinces, and barred permanently from any return to the eastern region. The Ho family's remaining capital assets were placed under imperial supervision for the duration of the exile. Kang Iseon attended the verdict in person with Yan Suoling and Lady Qin Yuhua, and accepted the formal closing of the matter on behalf of the manor. The 2 descendant verifications were completed in the weeks following the trial. The Rin descendant was a young woman of 22 named Su Yin-meng, who served as a junior priestess at the Sky Temple before traveling to the manor. The verification was conducted by Rin personally, through specific temple knowledge, and was confirmed within an hour. Su Yin-meng was offered a position as Rin's apprentice, and accepted with quiet gratitude. The Yen defector was a man of 30 named Yen Bo-ching, who had quietly opposed the surviving branch's policies for years, and chose the original Yen Suoling's restoration as his moment to act. Yen Suoling received the defector personally and accepted the offered service after an hour of private conversation. Yen Bo-ching was assigned as the household's official liaison to the surviving Yen branch under the new agreement. The household now numbered 15 permanent members, in addition to the rotating Qin scouts and village militia. Hu Meilan reorganized the manor's living arrangements to accommodate the expansion, and converted the eastern wing's lower floor into permanent staff quarters. Mo Qingji delivered a final report on the manor's library on the same week as the verifications. The catalog was now complete and identified 17 volumes of significant capital value beyond the original auctioned treatise. The estimated total value of the 17 volumes was approximately 12,000 gold at current capital auction rates. The household decided to retain 12 of the volumes as permanent reference and to sell 5 through the Qin auction channel across the coming year. The projected revenue was sufficient to fund the manor's full operational expansion for the next 5 years without requiring further alliances. Zhao Bingxin completed the 3rd obsidian sword on the same week and presented it to Yen Suoling as the intended primary user. The aristocrat accepted the blade with a small nod and tested the balance with the same practiced ease as Bai Hualing. The 3 obsidian swords represented a defensive capability that few private households in the empire could match. Wu Yingxia approached Kang Iseon in the cellar at the 3rd hour after midnight on the same night that the 3rd sword was delivered. The anchor form requested a private conversation about the future of the binding itself, rather than any immediate matter. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours and covered options that no prior discussion had addressed directly. The original sealing had been designed to last indefinitely under the manor's anchor structure, but the awakening had introduced flexibility that the original ritual had not anticipated. The 5 sealed forms could now choose to either remain bound to the manor indefinitely or to gradually convert into stable mortal forms across a transition period of perhaps 3 years. The choice was each woman's own to make, and could be made at any time of the individual's choosing. Wu Yingxia's own situation was different, because the anchor form was tied to the manor's structure rather than to any independent lineage. The anchor could not become mortal, but could be released into dissolution at any time the manor's owner chose. Kang Iseon asked Wu Yingxia what the anchor preferred, and the answer was that the current arrangement was acceptable for as long as the manor stood. Kang Iseon convened a private meeting of the 5 sealed women in the main hall on the following evening to share the information Wu Yingxia had provided. The presentation was made without pressure or preference, and the choice was framed as entirely individual. Yen Suoling indicated immediately that the bound state remained preferable for the present, and would be reconsidered after perhaps 10 years of observation. Bai Hualing made the same indication, with a brief comment that the swordsmanship at the current level suited the bound state better than any mortal alternative. Mo Qingzi requested time to consider the implications, and was given as much as needed. Rin chose to remain bound for the indefinite future, without further comment. Shen Yue requested the conversion to mortal form, and named the trauma of the old memories as the reason for the choice. Kang Iseon accepted Shen Yue's choice without question, and Wu Yingxia confirmed that the transition could begin within the coming week. The conversation closed with quiet acceptance from all parties and no visible tension between the different choices made. Lin Wanqing approached Kang Iseon in the courtyard on the morning after the choices were made, with a personal question of her own. The descendant asked whether a long-term role in the manor's permanent staff would be welcome, rather than the current guest arrangement. Kang Iseon accepted the request immediately, and Lin Wanqing was formally added to the household roster the same day. Mo Lianzhu made the same request within the same week, and was similarly accepted. The two Lin cousins requested permission to return to their military commissions, while maintaining a standing reserve obligation to the manor. The arrangement was accepted, and the cousins departed on the third day with the gratitude of the household. The manor's permanent composition was now settled, in a form that would persist into the coming years. Lady Qin Yuhua sent a final letter at the end of the same week, confirming that the Imperial Trade Office investigation had cleared the manor of all charges, and that the eastern region was now fully open to the household's operations. Kang Iseon filed the letter in the manor archive next to the original property deed. Spring returned to the Eastern Hill Manor on the first morning of the new year, with plum blossoms opening for the first time in 6 centuries. Kang Iseon walked the courtyard at dawn with Yan Suoling at the side and counted the small white flowers on the nearest branch. The aristocrat observed that the trees had recognized the household's permanence in the same season as the manor's full legal restoration. Bai Hualing trained Lin Wanqing and Su Yinmeng in the rear courtyard, with the obsidian blade catching the early light. Mo Qingzhi worked in the library with Mo Lianzhu, cataloging a fresh shipment of texts purchased through the Qin auction channel. Rin tended the cellar altar with Wu Yinxia at the side, reviewing the binding's quiet, steady rhythm. Shen Yue sat on the courtyard wall, with the first visible signs of mortal aging settling into the warrior's features, and a calm contentment that had not been present before. Hu Meilan supervised the morning kitchen with the brisk authority of a senior steward. Zhao Bingshen had departed for the Western Road 3 weeks earlier, with the manor's lasting friendship and a standing invitation to return. Lady Qin Yuhua arrived at the gate at the second hour with a formal escort and the announcement of a permanent eastern residence to be built within sight of the manor's hill. Kang Iseon received the news with quiet satisfaction and walked with the patron to the high point of the garden to discuss the placement. The household's 6 original sealed women and the new additions gathered in the main hall at the 7th hour for the formal opening of the year's first ledger. Yan Suoling read the household roster aloud and confirmed the position of each member in turn. Kang Iseon signed the ledger at the bottom of the final page and pressed the thumbprint that had sealed the original property deed nearly 2 years earlier. The manor stood with full legal standing, full political protection, full financial independence, and a household whose members had each chosen to be present. Wu Yingxia closed the ledger with a small inclination of the head that ended every important moment in the manor's life. The Eastern Hill Manor had survived its 6th owner.